The GIUK Gap, the $15 trillion black hole that could kill the global economy. $15 trillion could vanish in 48 hours, not because of a bank run or a warhead, but because a seam under cold water tears. 99% of transatlantic data rides glass threads on the seabed, squeezed through a corridor between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom. Planes would reroute, banks would go blind, power grids would island. Here's where it gets interesting. One actor has rehearsed this for decades. Russia's main Directorate of Deep-Sea Research, GUGI, sends deep-diving subs and research ships to prowl that seam. But hold on, because what I'm about to tell you next makes it personal. That $15 trillion daily exposure hangs on a handful of repeaters and landing rooms you've never seen, and the people stalking them know it. The seam in the sea, what the GIUK Gap actually is. Picture a map where the North Atlantic narrows without closing, Greenland on the left, Iceland in the middle, the United Kingdom on the right. That opening is the GIUK Gap, and it's not just a nickname from the Cold War. It's a literal funnel cut by geology and sound. Drop under the waves. The continental shelf falls away into deep basins. The Reykjanes Ridge runs southwest from Iceland like a rock spine, and the Faroe Shetland Channel slices deep water right up to the British Isles. This bathymetry matters because water layers bend sound, and those layers make acoustic highways. Submarines hide on them. Sonar listens along them. The physics pins everyone to the same lanes. Now lay the glass. Modern transatlantic fiber isn't a spiderweb. It's a handful of thick trunks bunched along the fastest routes. AE Connect hooks New York to Ireland. Havfru, also called AEC2, jumps into County Mayo and Denmark. Dunant throws bandwidth from Virginia Beach to France, but traffic still leans toward the shortest geodesics, and those geodesics brush the GIUK approaches. Apollo TAT-14, before it was retired, generations of wet plant keep choosing the same handful of seabed corridors because distance is money, and latency is money squared. Here's where it gets interesting. On paper, there's redundancy, multiple systems, diverse owners. In practice, those cables share seabed trenches, converge on the same landing stations, and plug into the same power feed equipment rooms a few meters apart. A backhoe in the wrong duct, a flood in a single building, or a trawler dragging an anchor across a clustered route turns redundant into correlated. Insurers quietly price that truth. Premiums bend upward near the GIUK lanes because underwriters read route maps more closely than marketing brochures, and because 99% of that transatlantic data has nowhere else to go fast. Zoom out to energy. Along the corridor's economic edge sit the big connectors that make Northern Europe hum. The North Sea Link moves 1.4 gigawatts between Norway and Great Britain. Viking Link ties Denmark to Britain with another 1.4 gigawatts. North Sea gas and LNG traffic skim the same weather and the same risk. When interconnectors trip in a storm, British power prices jump within minutes. When an LNG tanker misses its slot at Milford Haven or Isle of Grain, a week ripples through the grid. The web is tight, and the GIUK Gap is the narrow face of it. Above it all, patrol math has never gone away. After the late 1940s through the 1960s, the United States and allies laced the ocean floor with SOSUS, fixed hydrophone arrays to listen for loud, fast submarines. It worked so well it wrote doctrine. Track the Soviet boats through the gap, hold the line, sleep better. Today the kit is different. P-8A Poseidons, surface ships, towed arrays, but the logic is the same. If you can hear and herd traffic through a chokepoint, you own time. But there was one problem. The ocean changed more than the playbook did. Submarines got quieter, especially diesel electrics with air-independent propulsion that can loiter slow and silent. The seabed got crowded. Hyperscale data centers pulled routes toward London and Dublin, and private consortia stacked wet plant where latency wins deals. Offshore wind farms pushed cables, substations, and exclusion zones into once empty water. A peacetime industrial ocean now sits on top of a wartime chessboard. And then there's the human habit of forgetting where the real limit lives. We tell ourselves satellites will pick up the slack if a cable snaps. They won't. 99% of international data moves by subsea fiber because space doesn't have the capacity or the physics. Latency across low Earth orbit is fine for a Zoom call. It's a disaster for high-frequency trading, CLS settlement cutoffs, and real-time control signals. The backbone is wet, not orbital, and that's exactly why $15 trillion in daily exposure shakes when this seam does. Okay, so what exactly runs through this seam that turns a geographic quirk into a balance sheet risk? Here's the crazy part: payments. SWIFT messages ride these cables to tell banks who owes who, when, and how much. Continuous linked settlement, CLS, nets out foreign exchange deals worth trillions every day across time zones. Clearing houses for securities and derivatives ping both sides of the Atlantic constantly to mark positions and call margin. Their heartbeat follows the shortest, cleanest fiber they can buy. That route runs past the GIUK doors, and that's where the $15 trillion daily exposure stops being a headline and starts being your cutoff time. Remember the old Cold War line about the unsinkable aircraft carrier of the United Kingdom? That mindset bled into how planners saw the gap: layered, defended, manageable. It blinded them to a different kind of exposure: civilian, private, physical, laid along the same lines. The oil and gas boom in the North Sea made routine seabed work feel normal. You lay pipe, bury cable, wait for a weather window, fix what breaks. But that peacetime rhythm hides a truth. In winter, mean time to repair stretches from days to weeks. There aren't many specialized cable ships. Permits and sea state don't care about your SLA. Now add the shadow players. Russia's GUGI, the main directorate of deep-sea research, runs deep-diving submarines and oceanographic vessels that can map, monitor, and meddle with infrastructure at depth. Think titanium hulls like the AS-31 Losharik. Think the research ship Yanta, bristling with submersibles, loitering along cable routes with its AIS on until it's not. Western reports and parliamentary inquiries keep circling the same worry. The probing is persistent, the coverage is thin, and the attribution is murky. But hold on, because what I'm about to tell you next makes it worse. GUGI doesn't need to cut. It can learn, tap, and time repairs to maximize pain while everyone argues about weather. So the GIUK gap isn't a line on an old NATO chart. It's a seam where physics, finance, and habit meet. A funnel for sound and steel. A trench full of glass and copper. A place where the promise of redundancy turns under stress into a cluster that fails together. If you want to understand the risk, you start here, at the shape of the seabed, the pull of latency, and the myth that we've got enough slack in the system to shrug off a tear. We don't. Follow the money, how markets price the gap. So if the seabed is the seam, money is the pressure. Markets don't buy stories, they buy risk, and they price it every day. To see what the GIUK gap really means, you follow the premiums, the routes, and the clocks that run the modern economy, because 99% of cross-Atlantic data and roughly $15 trillion in daily settlement exposure live on those lines. Start shallow: insurance. Underwriters stare at route maps the way traders stare at charts. They see clustered fiber corridors hugging the GIUK approaches, cables landing through the same manholes into the same buildings, power feeds sharing rooms with shared backup. They don't argue redundancy on slides, they model correlated failure. That's why outage coverage, business interruption, and even cyber-physical extensions go pricier for assets tied to those lanes. When a cable cut near Ireland takes out two systems because a trawler snags a trench both share, that's not a black swan, that's a priced scenario. Freight tells on itself too. Winter on the North Atlantic adds a weather tax. More risk whispers now ride alongside it. Premiums for ships crossing those latitudes tick up because delay risk is real. Bad sea states stall both cargo and repair vessels. LNG carriers eyeing Milford Haven or Isle of Grain will pay to hedge missing a slot, because missing a slot pushes discharge a week, which moves power spreads. The point isn't drama, it's price discovery. The GIUK gap shows up as basis points. Now drill into the latencies that set spreads. High-frequency desks and cross-venue market makers live and die on microseconds. The shortest geodesics between New York and London track near the gap's approaches, and that's where firms buy capacity. They pay for diverse pairs on distinct systems that, in truth, share a seabed corridor for long stretches. They tune microwave and terrestrial backhaul to shave the last sliver. Here's the thing: when jitter jumps because a route downshifts to a longer detour, the algorithms back off. Quotes widen, depth thins, and volatility feeds on itself. You don't need a total blackout to make money more expensive. You just need noise in the path where price discovery breathes. London's heartbeat gives away the rest. LCH clears interest rate swaps linked to benchmarks that straddle both sides of the Atlantic. ICE clears energy contracts tied to cargoes crawling through the same weather. Clearing houses live on constant pings, variation margin calls, intraday marks, risk snapshots. Miss a window and margins spike to compensate. Dublin's data gravity pulls cloud and fintech platforms into the same corridor, so their backends ride the wet plant too. It's not a plot twist, it's architecture. The data path is the risk path. Okay, numbers. Every business day, banks net foreign exchange through continuous linked settlement, CLS, so settlement risk doesn't eat them alive. Trillions wash through those pipes in 24 hours. SWIFT messages carry the instructions that move that money, plus payments, plus securities legs. Add equities and derivatives clearing, and the power and commodity trades settling against physical flows, and you get a stack that leans toward $15 trillion in daily exposure to timing and trust. Not all of it dies if a cable fails. But hold on, shake timing, and confidence slips. Liquidity gets hoarded, spreads widen, and the cost of money jumps in minutes. Insurers price that hoarding too. War risk clauses carry carve-outs for ambiguous, hostile acts. Cyber policies wrestle with physical sabotage on digital infrastructure. After the Nord Stream blasts, exclusions widened. Ambiguity is a cost. If a research vessel loiters near a branching unit and 2 fibers go dark, nobody wants to be first to say attack. Claims sit, premiums jump, capital steps back. Here's the crazy part. Redundancy can make panic worse. When every risk model assumes failover through the same handful of diverse routes that actually meet in the same landing building, the first cut sends everyone onto the same lifeboat. Congestion spikes, latency surge, and automated safeguards trip in unison. The image of safety, parallel lines on a glossy map, becomes a crowd moving toward one exit. And because 99% of that traffic has to stay wet, those lifeboats fill fast. So markets price the gap with a quiet, rising curve, higher cover in winter, fatter tail probabilities for clustered loss, premiums for low latency capacity on the shortest arcs. They also price the absence, the few repair ships, the long permit clocks, the weather windows that don't care about quarter end. If you want to see it in a single frame, watch a cable repair tender stuck in port while a bomb cyclone pins the GIUK lanes shut. The screen shows wind, the ledger shows basis points. And somewhere, a margin desk breathes faster because a line on the seabed just got longer. 2 lines, 2 futures, a cable and a cargo. Let's make this real. Put your finger on one cable and one ship, and watch how a night in the GIUK lanes can bend both. The cable first. Havfru AEC2 runs a fat pair of fiber pairs from New Jersey to Ireland and on to Denmark, with a branch into the United Kingdom. It's glass in steel, armored near shore, lighter in deep water. Every 50 to 80 kilometers, a repeater wakes the photons back up. Those repeaters sip power sent from the landings, big gray power feed units humming in rooms you never see, behind fences you never notice. The landing stations look unimportant on purpose. Low buildings on windy coasts, a short walk from a beach that hides a billion-dollar artery. Failure isn't dramatic until it is. Anchors and trawls are the everyday killers. A fishing boat drags gear across a trench and scrapes insulation until copper shows. A storm shifts a sandbank and a buried span floats just enough to snag. Seabed landslides do the same damage with fewer human fingerprints. And then there's the deliberate kind, divers, submersibles, or a small unmanned vehicle nosing up to a repeater or a branching unit and giving it a bad day. The mean time to repair sounds calm on a brochure, 5 to 10 days if the weather plays nice. In February, north of Ireland, the weather does not play nice. Now the cargo. Picture an LNG carrier coming down from Hammerfest on Norway's Barents coast. It's fat with gas bound for the United Kingdom, slot booked at Milford Haven for Wednesday morning. The route skirts the rough side of Iceland's weather, then drops south along the corridor's edge. Crew watches the forecast the way a surgeon watches a heart monitor. Wind, swell, visibility, the tug availability in port. Miss that slot and you don't just rebook an hour later, you probably anchor. Maybe for days. Power traders in London can see that anchor icon on AIS, and they move spreads by the minute. Here's the setup. A bomb cyclone runs down off Greenland. The swell stacks into the Faroe, Shetland Channel and throws spray over decks in the North Sea. In the same 12-hour window, a trawler reports a winch jam near a known cable corridor west of County Mayo. Its AIS looks jittery, normal in bad weather, but the track hugs a repeater farm a little too neatly. At 02:13, monitoring alarms chirp in a landing station. One pair drops. At 02:17, a second span on a diverse system in the same trench starts throwing errors. The NOC reroutes, but the backup is a longer geodesic. Latency jumps, not a blackout, just enough jitter to make the fast money flinch. Meanwhile, the LNG captain calls in. Harbor says the swell at the breakwater is over the tug limit. Safety first. Stand off. The clock starts. Each hour in anchorage pushes discharge, and discharge pushes nominational flows on the grid. Traders recalc. The UK-Norway interconnector is already seesawing because of wind variability, and now a gas cargo waiting outside port turns an ordinary spike into a shape people remember. Back on the cable, the operator pages the repair contractor. There are only a handful of ships in Europe that can grab the right grapnel, cut, splice, and test in winter seas. One is in port in Scotland, pinned by the same storm. Permits to work in international waters near exclusive economic zones don't sign themselves, and the weather window that looked okay on Monday now closes by Wednesday. The repair ETA slips from 5 days to 9 to weather dependent. Everyone hates that phrase. Get ready for this. You don't need sabotage to build a crisis. Correlated exposure does it for you. The trawler might be exactly what it says it is. The ship's winch really could have jammed, but because both cables sit in the same trench and land in the same building, the redundant path adds delay at the worst moment. Because the LNG slot misses by 12 hours, a simple winter storm becomes a week-long gap you can't paper over. And since CLS, SWIFT, and market data all lean on those same shortest paths, the $15 trillion clock starts to stutter. And here's the thing. While ops teams file tickets and port captains juggle tugs, Russia's GUGI doesn't have to touch anything to learn. A research vessel loitering inside the weather, logging seabed profiles near branching units, watches who sails, who listens, who escorts. A small UUV can swim a grid in swell that grounds frigates. The rehearsal is the reconnaissance. The system shows its seams by how it strains. Two lines, one bends light, one moves heat. Both cross the same angry water at the same time. Break one, and the other gets harder to land. Delay one, and the money that counts seconds now counts days. That's not a thought experiment. That's a Tuesday in February when the Gap decides to remind everyone who really sets the clock. The hunters and the ghosts, submarines, drones, and research ships. While the cable team hunts a fault and the LNG captain rides out swell, something else is moving under that same sea. Not fast, not loud, patient. The hunters who treat the GIUK lanes like a laboratory don't need headlines. They need patterns, gaps, and time. Start with the boats that breathe silence. Diesel-electric submarines running on air-independent propulsion don't chase speed. They loiter, slow is stealth. They park on the thermal layers those basins carve, where sound bends and dies. Legacy plans assumed you catch motion crossing the gap. But here's the thing. A modern AIP boat can sit almost still on the rakegen's shoulder, watch traffic, and wait for a window that weather gifts and patrol math can't close. Now fold in the deep divers. Russia's main Directorate of Deep Sea Research, GUGI, sits outside the normal Navy chain with its own mission set. Map the seabed, touch what matters, and leave few fingerprints. Think titanium pressure hulls designed for depth, like there's 31 Losharek family tied to motherships that carry them close, then slip them down. Their world is repeaters, branching units, and the power feed harmonics you learn to hear if you sit near the right cable long enough. They don't need to cut to learn. Tapping, spoofing, stress testing, those live in the playbook too. Above them, the ghosts with names. Oceanographic, ships like Yanta wear the science story, sonars, submersibles, cranes, a crew that logs seabed profiles. They keep AIS on when a NATO frigate is near and go dark in the weather windows nobody wants. You're not gonna believe this, but storms are great camouflage. Bad sea states clear out casual eyes. A hull that can handle it buys time and space to loiter over waypoints that happen to match known trunk lines. Plot twist, you don't even have to touch the cable to create risk. You just have to make operators guess. Uncrewed systems turn that guesswork into a maze. Gliders, small UUVs, and seabed nodes are cheap compared to a frigate hour. A glider rides buoyancy to creep a zigzag across a corridor for weeks, sniffing for the electromagnetic whispers of a repeater or the tiny acoustic signature of high-voltage power feeds. A small UUV can hug bottom, pop a periscope of sensors into a sanded trench, and leave without a wake. Drop a handful, and you've got persistence that outlasts a patrol cycle by an order of magnitude. Exactly the kind of patience GUGI is built to use. Meanwhile, patrol math stays cruel. P-8A Poseidons can lay sonar by curtains and chase a contact, but crew, weather and range write hard limits. Frigates pull double duty, escorting high-value shipping one week, hunting a suspected sub the next. The grid is wide, the water is loud, and winter shrinks every sortie window. Cable repair ships. There are few, they're slow, and they're soft targets if someone wants to play chicken without firing a shot. Even a fishing fleet can crowd a work site into paralysis if the goal is delay without blame. Here's where it gets interesting. What nobody outside the small community knew for years is how much doctrine drifted under the surface. Seabed warfare isn't theory, it's a discipline. Find the weak points. The branching unit where a transatlantic trunk splits shoreward, the repeater farm where maintenance clusters, the landfall where multiple systems feed one room. Map cable signatures so you can come back in the dark. Catalog anchor scars and trawl lines so you can make damage look like chance. And when a crisis hits, use ambiguity like a weapon. If the cut looks like weather and the weather looks like a storm, who escalates first? Dual-use ships amplify the fog. Survey vessels from several flags run legitimate projects: wind farm sighting, pipeline inspection, seabed mapping for science. The same hulls, the same cranes, the same ROV garages can moonlight for a darker sponsor. AIS gaps, spoofed identifiers, or simple silence in a squall turn accountability into a shrug. According to open reports and parliamentary hearings, suspicious loitering has been logged near the GIUK approaches more than once. No proof that plays in court, plenty that plays in wargames. But wait, there's more. The hunters don't just scout cables, they scout the shepherds, sit near the Faroes and watch which airfields spin up when an unknown contact appears. Park off the Murray Firth and time how long it takes a P8 to get on station. Lurk near a cable landing and note whether a police car, a van, or no one shows when a sensor trips. Every reaction teaches. Every delay is a data point. The rehearsal is the mission. From their perspective, the GIUK Gap is a test range wrapped in legal gray. Territorial seas, exclusive economic zones, international waters, each draws a different response. A research ship can tow an array 5 meters outside a line and gather a library of signatures. A UUV can slip under an exclusion zone meant for trawlers. A mothership can drop a deep diver beyond everyone's jurisdiction, then drift innocently while the work happens far below. This was the moment everything changed for planners watching the seabed fill with assets and actors. The ocean didn't get smaller, the tools did. The price of patient presence fell. The payoff of small delays rose. And the gap, once a line you guarded with big steel and loud sensors, turned into a layered puzzle where ghosts can touch glass without leaving a trace you can show on TV. Here's where it gets interesting. The financial stack didn't adapt as fast, so $15 trillion keeps sprinting across a course the hunters now know by heart. Origin of the lie, the Cold War template. Understand why we treat the gap like a guardrail you can lean on. We need to go back to the late 1940s through the 1960s, when the ocean sounded different and the math seemed easy. Submarines then were loud, hot, and fast. Speed made noise, and noise made targets. So the United States and allies laced the North Atlantic with SOSUS, fixed hydrophones on the seabed that could hear a Soviet boat cross the acoustic highways like a truck on gravel. The winds were real. Planners watched bearings paint on paper and believed in lines you could hold. Those early detections did more than protect convoys, they wrote culture. If you could hear a sub in the GIUK lanes, you could judge intent, posture assets, and in a crisis bottle up a fleet. The United Kingdom sat like a hinge. Unsinkable aircraft carrier wasn't just a quip, it was a frame for thinking. Layered defenses from Greenland to Iceland to the United Kingdom would catch anything that mattered. That confidence sank deep. Meanwhile, communications looked redundant because, in a way, they were. Telegraph and early telephone cables crisscrossed the North Atlantic in fat numbers, often laid by state-led or monopoly firms that could afford backup. The map showed plenty of lines, so the mind learned diversity. But here's the thing, those copper-era routes and business models died when fiber arrived. Bandwidth ballooned, owners consolidated, and latency turned routes into race tracks. The old mental model, lots of lines equals lots of safety, stuck around long after the reality changed. Oil and gas work in the North Sea added a second illusion. Fixing things on the seabed looked routine. Divers, ROVs, barges, and weather windows, industrial life ran on schedules. If a pipeline or a telecom cable broke, you called a ship, waited a few days, and patched it. That peacetime cadence bled into strategy. People started to believe the ocean would give you time. Winter would be a nuisance, not a veto. Doctrine froze around those beliefs. SOSUS taught that chokepoints are sensors you can trust. Navy tasking and budgets grew up assuming transits would be loud enough and rare enough to track. Civil planners assumed cable redundancy because legacy maps and procurement slides said so. And the idea that civilian infrastructure sat outside the line of fire, well, that was convenient, so it stuck. You could plan a war at sea without thinking about a landing station behind a dune. What nobody priced was how technology would undercut each pillar. Submarines went quiet and slow. Fiber turned 20 old copper lines into one trunk with repeaters you can pick out by their hum. Private consortia drove cables into the same narrow corridors because distance shaved microseconds and microseconds sold services. The unsinkable carrier frame hit a seam full of glass and power feeds. SOSUS still hears, but it hears a different ocean. So the lie didn't come from malice, it came from success. The system worked, so we trusted the template. We kept the language, layers, choke points, redundancy, while the seabed changed under our feet. And by the time the hunters learned the new game, the rest of us were still guarding the old one. The modern stack, dense, fast, fragile. So now drop into today's build. The seabed isn't empty water with a few lines. It's a tight bundle of high-value kit crammed into narrow corridors because speed pays. Cable concentration isn't an accident, it's a business case. Hyperscalers want the lowest latency between New York, London, Dublin, and beyond, so consortia keep laying trunks along the same geodesics. Fewer owners hold more miles. They share ducts near shore to save permits and beach real estate, and the wet plant piles up where land meets cheap power and fiber backhaul. Here's the thing about repeaters. They're the unsung choke points. Every 50 to 80 kilometers, a can full of amplifiers keeps light alive, and every one of those cans draws power from shore through the copper in the cable. That links the entire wet system to rooms on land called Power Feed Equipment Rooms, PFEs, where big racks manage volts and current. Vendor lock-in sneaks in here. You buy a system end-to-end, with repeater tech from one maker and PFEs that speak its dialect. Branching units, a kind of underwater switch where a trunk splits toward a landing, multiply convenience and risk. Hit a branch, and you don't just nick one span, you wound the hub that feeds several. Meanwhile, at the edges, the energy build-out crowds the same shelf. The North Sea Link moves 1.4 gigawatts between Norway and Great Britain. Viking Link brings another 1.4 gigawatts between Denmark and Britain. These don't sit inside the GIUK Gap, but their economics and routing live in the same neighborhood. Substations, offshore platforms, and export cables stitch a web across storm tracks and fairways. When an interconnector trips, reserve margins shrink and prices whip. And because cable PFEs depend on stable grid power at the landing, a power hiccup ashore can blink optics miles offshore. Energy and data aren't separate stacks. They lean on each other, and both lean on a corridor that carries 99% of the data that makes markets clear. Data gravity does the pulling. London is finance and exchange points. Dublin is cloud. That gravity drags roots into the corridor like a river pulling logs to a bend. 99% of international data goes by subsea cable, not satellite, because capacity and physics say so. So when hyperscalers commission diverse paths, those paths often leave the station on different trays, then merge into the same trenched corridor a few miles out. On a map, it's two colors. Under a grapnel, it's one grab. Repair is where the fragility really shows. Specialized ships with cable tanks, plows, ROVs, and crews that know the drill are scarce. They move at the speed of weather, and winter writes the schedule. Even if the fault is simple, a permit clock starts when you touch certain zones, and a sea state limit says, "Not today," more often than anyone likes. Mean time to repair in brochures, 5 to 10 days, turns into 3 weeks if the swell drops and customs clears that part. Every extra day means more rerouting, more latency, and more jitter pumping into systems built for tight timing. Get ready for this. Common mode failure is baked in by design choices that looked efficient. Shared beach ducts, shared manholes, shared landing buildings because coastal real estate, grid tie-ins, and fiber backhaul all cluster where roads and power already exist. The first flood, fire, or contractor error inside one low-slung building can knock out multiple trunks. Add a firmware push gone wrong across a vendor monoculture, and you've got repeaters or PFEs across several systems glitching in the same way at the same moment. It doesn't have to be sabotage. It can be a bad Tuesday. Meanwhile, fishing grounds and shipping fairways press right up against cable corridors. Armoring helps near shore, burial helps where the seabed lets you dig, but trawl scars still mark the charts. Anchors drag. Storms expose buried spans. And because many diverse systems chose parallel corridors to satisfy latency and cost, the same anchor can touch 2 cables on a bad day. The cluster illusion looks like safety until a winch jams, and that insurance scenario becomes a call at 2 in the morning. Here's the crazy part. The monitoring that keeps this world humming, OTDR traces, power feed telemetry, spectrum analyzers, tells you a fault is out there, roughly how far, and sometimes whether it's a shunt to ground or a break. It doesn't tell you why, so you roll a ship, in a storm, to crowded corridor, while an oceanographic vessel of uncertain purpose loiters upwind of a branching unit. Ambiguity becomes a factor in the repair plan, which slows everything else. And over all of it, the market clock ticks. Low-latency routes that sell premium capacity are the ones that detour worst when the shortest corridor stumbles. Queued traffic shifts to second-best paths that add dozens of milliseconds. That hits high-frequency trading, cross-Atlantic clearing heartbeats, and time-sensitive control links first. It also fans out to cloud backends tied to Dublin and London. A WAF rule that used to hit in 20 milliseconds now hits in 80, and some service starts to thrash. It looks like the internet is slow. It's really the seabed reminding you it's a single system. Dense, fast, fragile, the modern stack didn't drift here by accident. We built it this way because short was cheap, shared was easy, and speed won deals. Now the bill comes due in winter, in weather, in rooms full of humming PFEs where 24 blue LEDs say normal until the ground shakes or the tide gets inside. The 72-hour crunch if the gap goes dark. Hour 0, 2 trunk lines along the GIUK approaches throw alarms. It's midnight in London, early evening in New York. Not a total blackout, packets still move, but latency jumps, jitter spikes, and the fast lanes breathe like a runner with a stitch. Trading servers see it first. Pings that lived at 30 milliseconds are now 55 and wobbling. Market makers widen quotes because models hate uncertainty. It doesn't look like sabotage, it looks like bad weather. That's worse, because everyone expects you to trade through it, while $15 trillion in daily exposure still has to thread the same storm. By hour 3, clearinghouses start padding risk. Variation margin calls go out earlier, a shade heavier, because prices are jumping and the pipes feel thin. Cross-Atlantic arbitrage loses its snap. What used to settle in tight loops now sloshes. A few desks pull their auto-quoting, flick into human review, and you can feel the book hollow out. It's a small thing, a few basis points, but it's everywhere at once. Airlines notice at hour 6. Oceanic Control West of Ireland pushes fallback procedures. Reduced separation on long tracks needs crisp voice and data. The ATC backhaul reroutes across longer paths and satellites pick up the slack, but spectrum is tight and clouds over the North Atlantic chew margins. Dispatchers watch text updates lag, so they stretch spacing and open longer tracks that burn extra fuel. A flight that would ride a short nat track now loops south. Crew times wobble. Ticket prices won't jump today, but costs just did. Satellites feel like a parachute until everyone grabs the same straps. Leo constellations can't swallow what the GIUK trunks carry in a normal hour. So you see a weird shape, critical messages make it, but bulk gets choked. Video calls stutter, replication jobs pause, cloud control planes start retry storms that look like the internet is slow, but are really the ocean asking for patience. No one has any. Power markets catch a bruise by hour 12. Wind in the North Sea is fickle, and tonight it's dropping. The British grid leans on interconnectors and peakers. Viking Link oscillates, North Sea Link trims flows to ride voltage constraints. Prices jump in quarter-hour blocks. Traders feed data through backup routes and get stale numbers a few seconds late. Usually fine. Tonight, with spreads jumping, that lag turns into bad fills. Demand response kicks in at industrial sites. Households don't notice yet, but the curve looks wrong. Banks feel the pain by hour 18. SWIFT messaging still works, but backhaul jitter means some gateways start queuing. CLS cutoffs are a hard edge. You miss them, you eat settlement risk. So operations teams pull levers they hate, move cutoffs earlier for certain pairs, push non-urgent wires to the next window, tell desks to stop pushing marginal trades. Liquidity hoarding starts quiet, then ripples. Someone somewhere can't roll an overnight at the price they expected. That someone gets very conservative very fast. Ports slow down at hour 24. AIS tracks show an LNG carrier still standing off at Milford Haven, swell over tug limits. Insurance underwriters tack on awaiting confirmation to policies covering ships transiting bad lanes. War risk underwriters whisper but don't act. Ambiguity rules. A cable repair ship that should have sailed at dawn sits in harbor, captain watching whitewater stack across the breakwater and shaking his head. Permits are in a folder. Useless until the sea says yes. Hour 30, politicians call briefings. The intel picture is fog. A research vessel pinged near a branching unit before the storm hit. Now its AIS is off, and that's not illegal in a gale. A P-8 ran a line of sonarbuoys but got kicked off station by icing risk. You can escalate patrols, but you can't escort a cable repair ship through 30-foot swell. Someone floats Article 4 language. Cooler heads say, buy time. Here's where it gets interesting. The hunters love this gap between caution and proof. Meanwhile, software eats itself. Vendor monoculture bites when a routine check script flags high error rates and starts toggling cards. On one system, fine. On three that share the same codebase, ugly. Engineers hit stop, but not before alarms spray up to NOCs across 2 continents. Twitter lights up with cable cut rumors. Shares of a cable owner dip 1%. Not much, but in a thin market it feeds a story. Hour 36. Clearing houses tighten intraday margin for products needing crisp cross-Atlantic marks. Small brokers feel it first. Collateral that covered yesterday doesn't today. They call clients. Clients call banks. Banks say, we are watching liquidity. The spiral is emotional before it's systemic, which is how these things always start. Spreads are wide, depth is thin. Volatility traders eat well, everyone else holds their breath. Airlines settle into new tracks. Fuel burn is up. A couple of flights divert when voice links crackle at the wrong time. Safety is fine, but confidence isn't. Delay comp turns a weather problem into a cost line that lasts weeks. It'll show up on earnings calls. Not today, but this is the start of that paragraph. Hour 42. The repair window looks like Friday if the swell drops to 2 meters. Forecast says maybe Sunday. The cable operator issues a muted statement. Fault located approximately 120 kilometers offshore, weather delaying repair mobilization. Markets red, not soon. HFT routes start hard-locking to second-best paths and stay there. The small will wait it out, optimism leaves the room. Governments face a fork by hour 48. Do you surge escorts to sit on a corridor in a storm, or do you hold them back to protect a repair that hasn't started? Do you call out the research vessel by name and risk an escalation cycle built on inference? Signals matter, so does silence. No one wants to be first to guess wrong on camera. Hour 60. The LNG carrier gives up its slot and rebooks for Monday. Power spreads reflect it within minutes. Another cable throws soft errors, maybe load, maybe real. NOCs throttle traffic to keep critical flows clean. Cloud providers push emergency advisories to customers with footprints in London and Dublin. Higher latencies expected. Consider regional failovers. Most won't. Data gravity isn't a toggle. Hour 72, nothing catastrophic. No headlines with flames. Just a corridor that's slower, thinner, and meaner than it was 3 days ago, and a market that feels it in margins, spreads, and nerves. Here's the crazy part: redundancy did its job, and that's what hurt. Everyone fell back to the same lifeboats at once. They held, but the scramble cost real money, and the storm isn't done talking. And remember, 99% of cross-Atlantic data was still trying to get through the same seam. False redundancy, the cluster illusion. Here's the crazy part: we built comfort out of parallel lines on a map. 2, 3, 4 cables in the same picture look like resilience. But here's the thing: parallel often means shared trench, shared backhaul, shared power feeds, and one low-slung landing building with all the brains in one room. That's not diversity. That's correlated failure wearing a high-vis vest. Start under the waves. Cable routes don't wander. They run in corridors carved by depth, geology, and cost. Armoring near shore, burial where the seabed lets you dig, then long deep-water stretches where the fastest geodesic wins. So diverse systems often lie a few meters apart for miles. One anchor drag, one trawl pass, one slope failure, and you don't nick a line, you graze a bundle. It's not hypothetical. Charts show trawl scars cutting right across declared corridors. The seabed keeps its receipts. Follow the corridor ashore and the illusion deepens. Many independent cables squeeze through the same beach manholes and ducts because coastal permits are a nightmare and real estate is tight. Inside the fence, they enter one landing station because power, security, and terrestrial fiber aggregate there. In that room, power feed equipment racks hum side by side, sometimes tied to the same utility substation and even the same backup generator. One flood, one fire, one contractor error with a ladder, and you've just discovered how quickly parallel becomes single point. Now the vendor layer. Wet plants are end-to-end ecosystems, repeaters, branching units, supervisory control, PFEs, usually from one manufacturer per system. That's fine until a firmware bug or a control script pushes a bad state across fleets built on the same codebase. You think you've got 4 owners and 4 routes. Under the hood, you've got the same logic making the same mistake at the same time. Common mode failure isn't dramatic, it's quiet symmetry. It takes hours to even prove what's happening. Meanwhile, backhaul diversity can be a mirage. 2 transatlantic systems that split 1,000 miles offshore can reconverge into the same metro fiber ring a few miles inland, because that's where the IXPs, data centers, and cloud on-ramps live. A digger hits an urban duct bank or a flood takes down a colo basement, and transoceanic redundancy collapses at a city block. The map won't show it. The invoice won't warn you. The ticket in the NOC at 2:00 a.m. will. Energy ties the knot even tighter. Cable landings need stable grid to feed repeaters. Interconnectors and local substations share the same coastline, the same floodplains, the same winter storms. A grid flicker trips a PFE, optics blink, supervisory control throws alarms, and traffic shifts to backup routes already sweating. Energy and data form a couple. When one stumbles, the other grabs the table, and everyone feels the wobble. Fishing grounds and fairways add a social twist. Push cables away from trawlers, and you run into ship lanes. Push off lanes, and you crowd fisheries. Protective exclusion zones stay narrow to keep peace, which means danger stays close. Armoring buys you time, not immunity. And because multiple systems squeezed into those same negotiated corridors, the hazard couples across owners, whether they like each other or not. Now zoom up to markets. The models that manage risk echo the hardware beneath them. HFT shops buy diverse capacity that in practice shares seabed for long runs. Clearinghouses run playbooks assuming clean failover to the other path that lands in the same building. When a cut hits, everyone scrambles onto the same lifeboats. LEO backhaul, southern detours, slower trunks, and that synchronized move spikes latency everywhere at once. Algorithms see the same jitter, print the same step-back signal, and spreads widen in chorus. Redundancy on paper becomes correlation in practice. Insurance reads this better than marketing does. Underwriters hike rates not because pirates lurk in every squall, but because hazards stack, shared ducts, shared buildings, shared vendors, shared backhaul and winter. War risk clauses and cyber carve-outs widen when ambiguity rules. A research ship loitering near a branching unit in lousy weather might be nothing. It's priced like it could be something, because claims after maybe sabotage can sit for months. Capital hates the word maybe. Here's where it gets interesting. The fixes we brag about, automatic protection switching, fast reroute, traffic engineering, save minutes, but can also stampede packets into the same choke. APS sees loss and flips. TE shifts flows off a hot path. Do that across many networks fed by the same telemetry, and you create waves, self-inflicted micro DDoS on the backup. Engineers watch graphs breathe like lungs because the control loops couple through the same few pipes. Nobody meant to synchronize. The network did it for them. And because CLS, SWIFT, and market data share the same few corridors, those waves hit money first. And remember the human layer. Ops teams across different firms train on the same gear, read the same runbooks, and meet the same regulators. In a storm, they make the same safe choices, delay that repair sale, hold that cutover, wait for the swell to drop. Good calls, each one. Taken together, they extend the outage window and line it up across systems. The cluster illusion isn't just physics and silicon, it's people staying smart in parallel. Plot twist, even good diversity can backfire when the stress is regional. Rerouting south away from the gap adds thousands of kilometers, pushing latency past thresholds where financial systems and control planes start to misbehave. It keeps packets alive, but breaks timing contracts. So you avoided the damaged corridor and triggered the very risk buffers designed to keep markets calm. So the lesson lands simple. Redundancy that lives in the same place isn't redundancy. Diversity that shares power, buildings, code, or habits turns one cut into a chorus. The cluster illusion comforts until the sea tests it. Then it sings in unison, and the harmony is expensive. Winners, losers, and the silent middle. So when the gap coughs, who breathes easier and who reaches for oxygen? The splits aren't clean, but you can see the edges. Winners first, and it's a short list. Low Earth orbit backhaul providers sell out their premium pipes fast. Capacity is tiny compared to the wet backbone, but price moves on scarcity, not ideals. They flip on traffic shaping, carve priority lanes for enterprise and government, and invoice at rates that make CFOs blink. Towage firms and the handful of sovereign or private cable repair contractors book standby and day rates that climb with the swell. If a window opens, they're the ones threading a needle for hazard pay. Volatility traders do exactly what the word says. They trade the shape of panic. Wider spreads, thinner depth, more jump risk. That's a playground. Market makers widen quotes, get paid for standing in when others step back, and hedge with options that suddenly matter. A few cloud operators that built real geographic diversity, separate landings, separate metros, see customers flee to them for failover. They didn't win by luck, they paid for it years ago. Losers stack up faster. Clearinghouses hate uncertainty more than they hate loss. When marks arrive late and cross-venue prices wobble, margin calls balloon to protect the system. That pushes stress onto small brokers and energy merchants first, then rolls uphill. FX hubs built on the tightest possible timing across the Atlantic lose their edge. If you're selling lowest latency and you detour through a southern arc, your pitch just broke. Airlines eat costs with no PR upside, extra fuel on longer tracks, crew time out of position, maintenance windows slipping because aircraft arrive late. An LNG importer missing slot after slot burns demurrage, pays balancing charges, and walks into a spot market that smells nervous. Data-heavy fintechs and high-speed shops that pegged their stack to GIUK latency paths feel their differentiator melt. They still function, but their spread math turns sour. Then there's the silent middle, the folks who didn't cause this, can't fix it, and still carry the bill. Coastal towns that host landing stations wake up to police tape and patrol trucks, and nobody told them what the squat building by the dunes really does. Fishermen who have dragged those grounds for decades run into fast, declared exclusion zones and patrol boats that frown at their AIS tracks. They're told to steer clear of critical infrastructure that moved under their nets when nobody asked. Port workers stare at a tanker bobbing outside the breakwater and know their week just got shorter shifts. Small data centers a mile off the main fiber ring watch SLAs slip and can't call a vendor to fix the ocean. Insurance makes that middle feel smaller. After every ambiguous incident, underwriters revisit wordings. War risk expands to include hostile acts without fingerprints. Cyber carve-out stretch to cover physical damage caused by cyber means, which is a fancy way to say good luck. Claims bogged down in attribution arguments. Was it weather, negligence, or something darker? Premiums move first. Coverage tightens second. Capital allocators in the background trim exposure to firms that lean on those corridors without visible resilience plans. You won't see that on a billboard. You'll see it in higher rates and vanished offers. Policy doesn't help quickly. Control of the seabed is split across navies, coast guards, regulators, private owners, and more acronyms than a briefing can hold. No one wants to declare an attack without proof. No one wants to admit we can't prove it. So attribution lags, escalation pauses, repair sales when weather allows, and in the gap between those facts, rumor sets prices. Here's where it gets interesting. Some winners don't actually win if the story lasts. Leo backhaul burns goodwill when billed at crisis rates. Volatility traders feast, then face blame. Even towage and repair firms get caught in inquiries about who got priority and why. The real winner is whoever learns fast and quietly hardens their piece, separates landings, splits vendors, drills escorts, and publishes just enough to earn a premium without painting a target. That's how you sell resilience to people who remember the $15 trillion number. Most people sit in the quiet middle, paying for a map line they'll never see. They don't get a headline. They get a dimmed phone screen that won't refresh, a flight that lands late, a power bill that spikes on a windy night. The gap chooses its winners and losers. The rest of us learn which one we are when the weather turns. The war game, a cold night in February. Set the board, it's late February. A bomb cyclone has dropped out of the Labrador Sea, stacked swell like moving cliffs through the Faroe, Shetland Channel, and iced every deck from Reykjavik to Peterhead. ASW patrols are thin, 2 P-8s on rotation, one nursing a hydraulic fault, a frigate in dry dock, another on fisheries protection. The only regional cable repair ship sits in a Scottish harbour, captain watching white waters slam the breakwater and muttering, "Not today." Move 1 hits at 21:40. A mid-sized trawler local flag radios a winch jam west of County Mayo. AIS shows a jagged drift pattern that could be weather or a shadow over repeater farm you'd rather not park on. The track lingers along a trench known to carry 2 diverse systems. 10 minutes later, a NOC in Dublin flags rising bit errors on one span. At 22:03, the second system, sold as independent, throws alarms. Supervisory control shoves traffic to a longer arc. Latency adds 25 milliseconds, thin but enough to sting. Unknown to them, across the North Sea, a research vessel with a clean billboard history slows near an interconnected jointing bay. Its AIS flickers, then holds steady. The weather explains it. That's the problem. A P-8 crew, briefed on suspicious loiterers, wants to lay a buoy line. Icing risk says no. They circle wider, log the track, and go home under a ceiling that eats fuel. Midnight markets in New York feel the wobble, quotes widen, a few algos stand down. In London, risk managers shift in their chairs. The LNG tanker outside Milford Haven calls harbour, swell over tug limits, stand off. Power desks refresh spreads, North Sea Link jitters under voltage constraints. Viking Link leans hard, prices bump in quarter-hour blocks. Not a crisis, yet. Move 2 slides in under cover of noise. A small UUV never identified plods a lawn mower pattern near a branching unit on the outer edge of the corridor. The signature is there if you're listening for it, just a whisper in the PFE harmonics and a hiccup on an OTDR trace. Engineers argue on a bridge call, storm scouring, or something with intent. Nobody says sabotage. Everybody hears the word anyway. 3 days earlier, something strange occurred. Satellite imagery showed the research vessel taking an awkward dogleg to avoid a declared wind farm survey box, then resuming a track that, by coincidence, overlays historic cable charts. That detail sits in a folder now, waiting for someone to ask the right question. Tonight, there's no time. Dawn that never brightens. The repair ship gets a green-yellow weather update, possible sail in 24 hours if swell drops below 2 meters. Forecast says maybe, permits are inked, they don't move the sea. The frigate available for escort has a crew rest issue and a minor hull sensor fault. Command can push it, risk stacking small problems in big water, or hold and wait. The cable owner asks, politely but firmly, for an escort commitment once the gangway lifts. The Navy says, we'll try. Markets open. The opening auction breathes shallow. Volatility smiles steepen. Clearing houses pad intraday margin. A mid-tier broker gets a call, top up or trim, they trim. Liquidity thins by inches you only see if you stare hard. A rumor threads Twitter, 2 cables down west of Ireland. The owner posts a careful line, service degradation on one segment, reroutes in place, investigating. Traders read, longer than you think. Decision Fork 1, escalate patrols or protect the repair. Send more metal to the corridor and use strengthen deterrence, but you also crowd a future work site and spook insurers into slapping war risk language on every policy tied to that box. Hold metal back and you buy a smoother repair window if the weather ever quits, while inviting critics to ask why you didn't show the flag. Decision Fork 2, data versus energy. The LNG tanker has now missed one slot. Another slot opens in 36 hours if the swell dips. Port wants tugs prioritized because each missed discharge bends the grid. The cable operator wants a hard bubble around the eventual cut and splice, with patrol boats to keep fishing traffic from pinballing the work. Coast Guard has 3 hulls, all busy. Choose. Outcome range runs wide. In the optimistic branch, the swell drops on schedule, the repair ship sails under gray escort, and the fault is a simple drag, cut, buoy, grapple, splice, test, bury. 4 days later, latency shrinks, and everyone tells themselves the system worked. But get ready for this, our wargame rolls the tougher die. The swell lingers. The research vessel reappears 2 miles north of the branching unit with a polite AIS ping. Legal, nerve-wracking, social media paints it as a vulture. A fishing cooperative, irritated by sudden exclusion notices, pushes a boat close to the perimeter during a brief weather lull, forcing patrol to hail and shadow. The repair captain hesitates. He's right too. The window slips 12 hours. The escort rotates crew. The gap goes skinny again. Back on shore, a firmware quirk hits PFEs across 2 systems, slowing supervisory polling to a crawl. Engineers pause proactive tests to avoid false trips. The fault isolation loop drags. By day 5, the LNG slot is gone. Another tanker queues behind it. Power prices carry a bruise you can see in week-ahead strips. Clearinghouses keep margins fat. A minister gives a careful statement about unusual activity and robust response. Reporters pounce. Attribution? None. Proof? Weather and coincidence. The research vessel has already sailed. Lesson learned: weather is an accomplice. Ambiguity is a weapon. And the GIUK steam, under stress, turns good plans into a choice between 2 bad ones. Move fast and risk a headline you can't support, or move slow and pay a bill you can't dodge. The fixes that actually work. So how do you sew a seam that lives under bad water and worse timing? You don't promise invincibility. You buy time, you cut correlation, and you make the easy sabotage paths hard. It's boring work that saves exciting days. Start with steel and spacing. Physical diversity isn't 2 colors on a marketing map. It's kilometers apart in the seabed. You space new corridors wide enough that one anchor drag or slope failure can't kiss both. Near shore, you trench deeper where geology allows, then armor heavier across fishing grounds and fairways. Keep those armored sections short, surgical, and mapped, so captains know exactly where not to drop iron. And push landfalls out of the copy-paste template. Different beaches, different manholes, separate ducts, and crucially, separate landing buildings on higher ground with separate utility feeds and generators. One flood shouldn't turn, redundant, into offline. Inside those buildings, you split the guts. 2 power feed equipment rooms, fire separated, on independent substations if the grid will let you. Water detection that isn't a sad afterthought, drains, barriers, and pumps sized for storms that actually happen. You don't buy one vendor soup to nuts. You mix where you can, different repeater families across different systems, separate supervisory control stacks, and change windows that never overlap. Vendor monoculture makes life easy until one bug hits everything at once. Don't give it that shot. At sea, branching units get the vault treatment. You bury them deeper, you drop protective mattresses, and you record their exact positions with enough precision to matter in a storm. You don't mark them like an X on a pirate map, but you give honest coordinates to the people who actually need them: navies, coast guards, and the repair ships you'll beg to sail on a Wednesday in February. That way, if someone loiters, by coincidence, you don't guess, you act. Now build escorts into muscle memory. High-value movements, cable repair ships, fuel carriers, interconnector maintenance barges, sail with eyes and hulls nearby when threat flags go up. Not every day. on surge protocols that spin up fast. You write the checklist now, who calls whom, which patrol boats peel off fisheries protection, which frigate covers which box, which airframe lays sonarbuoys to buy a clean work site. You drill it in plain, whether so the first rep isn't inside a bomb cyclone. Sensing turns the fog into shapes. You lay a discrete seabed sensor mesh across narrow corridors, passive acoustics for prop and pump signatures, low-power M sniffers for repeater harmonics. You tie it to AIS fusion that doesn't stop at ships, pull in satellite tracks, coastal radar, and even fishing cooperative data. If a research hull starts lawn mowing a corridor, the dashboard doesn't blink 3 days later, it pings now. Cable integrity monitoring grows teeth, better OTDR baselining, real-time PFE analytics, and anomaly models trained on winter noise so they don't cry wolf when the swell kicks up. On the economic side, you hardwire diversity into incentives, make real geographic separation a condition of regulatory approval and financing. If two independent systems share a beach duct, they don't count as diversity for critical workloads. Clearinghouses and CLS windows get resilience carved into their rules, latency buffers, and grace periods that activate when certified cable events hit. You don't reward latency arms races that glue every route to the same shortest arc. You price resilience premiums that pay operators who keep landings and vendors apart. Governance is where most plans die, so you make it small, clear, and practiced. Build seabed critical infrastructure compacts that bind navies, coast guards, grid operators, cable owners, and port authorities to one playbook. Joint repair pools pre-contract ships, crews, and kit, with cross-border permits templated and ready. You don't want a minister phoning a minister while swell eats your window. You want a number you call and a binder that opens. Then you drill, tabletops first, then live sails with escorts, buoys, and board crews who learn the route by muscle and eye. Fisheries aren't the enemy, they're sensors with nets. Bring them in. Share corridor outlines, not secrets. Trade small exclusion zones for real-time communication. Text alerts that beat rumor. Compensation that lands fast when a tow line cuts by mistake. And workshops where skippers point to charts and say, "Don't put that there." Locals will keep you honest about weather and water in ways spreadsheets never will. LEO isn't a backbone, but it is a brace. You pre-book emergency slices with LEO and GEO providers for control planes and critical trading links. Then you test failovers quarterly. You don't dump bulk on space. You earmark narrow, clean lanes for the handful of signals that must live through a cut. And you write the playbook so ops teams don't improvise when the trace spikes at 2 in the morning. Here's the thing, none of this works if it hides. You publish just enough to earn trust. A public map that shows corridor spacing in bands, not dots on targets. A resilience report that lists landfall separation, vendor mix, and tested escort drills without handing an attacker a checklist. Markets pay for confidence. Regulators bless what they can explain. And viewers remember the hook. 99% of the data that runs $15 trillion a day depends on this. Get ready for this. The most powerful fix is time. Wider spacing buys it. Hardened landings keep it. Escorts protect it. Sensing warns early to add it. Economic grace windows spend it smart. Governance turns it into action. You can't stop the sea or the ghosts under it. You can make sure the next cold night in February costs hours, not weeks, and money, not confidence. The uncomfortable trade-offs. So here's the bill nobody wants to read. Resilience isn't free. Every meter of wider corridor spacing, every second landing building on higher ground, every escort hour, it all lands on someone's ledger. Who pays, who benefits, and who just smiles at the press conference. Start with latency versus resilience. Finance and cloud sold a decade on speed, shortest arcs, tight timing, premium routes. Real diversity means longer paths and split vendors. That adds milliseconds and millions. Traders grumble because microseconds are edge. But here's the thing, the day the sea gets mean, those extra milliseconds buy you a market that still clears. You can't have both peaks. You choose where you want to be wrong. Now secrecy versus transparency. If you publish every branching unit and splice vault, you hand a checklist to anyone with a grudge and an ROV. If you publish nothing, markets assume the worst and price fear. The middle path is messy, bands not dots, capabilities not coordinates. Enough to show regulators and investors that the landing buildings really are separate, and the PFVs don't share a wall, not enough to paint a target. You'll get yelled at from both sides. That's the job. Militarizing the seabed sounds clean until you sail into law. Research, vessels have rights. UUVs in international waters sit in grey. Escorting repair ships with frigates deter mischief, but they also raise temperature. Each close pass gets filmed, clipped, and turned into a clip with a flag. You want presence that protects without daring someone to bump bows. That means patrol boats, Coast Guard colors first, Navy behind the line, and rules of the road drilled so a tense hail doesn't become a headline. Environmental limits bite too. Armored corridors and wider exclusion zones look simple on a whiteboard. On a working sea, they squeeze fishermen and wildlife. Bury deeper and you stir benthic habitat. Push trawlers out and you collapse margins in towns that already feel ignored. The only answer that works is slow, co-design routes with skippers, pay real compensation fast when lines snag, and police your own contractors so a sloppy lay doesn't rip up grounds for a decade. It's not charity. It's consent that survives a storm. Policy runs headlong into budgets. Navies want hulls and hours. Regulators want audits and drills. Cable owners want permits that move and security without lawsuits. Someone has to write the check. If you push it all onto private balance sheets, you'll get quiet corners where corners get cut. If you push it all to the state, you'll get delays and speeches. Shared repair pools, cost sharing for escorts, resilience credits on landing fees. That's where the boring wins live. Boring wins are the only kind that last. Here's the crazy part. Every dollar you spend making the seabed safer looks invisible when it works. No outage, no quote, no applause. Accountants will circle it in red ink and ask if you really need 2 buildings and 2 substations. You do, and you won't get to say, "I told you so," without a bad day you were trying to avoid. You need boards and ministers who can stomach paying for headlines that never print. Now the tech crutch everyone wants, Leo. It's magic until you do the math. Great for control planes, critical backhaul, emergency voice and ATC text, even a sliver of market data. It will not carry 99% of international traffic. Physics, link budgets and spectrum say no. So yes, pre-book slices, test failovers, teach ops teams not to drown their constellations with bulk, but don't sell it as a replacement. Sell it as a brace that keeps the knee from buckling while the surgeon gets there. Attribution is the ugliest trade. If you shout attack and you're wrong, you torch credibility and maybe start something worse. If you whisper whether when a glove just brushed your repeater, you invite a second brush. The only way through is thresholds you agree on before the storm. Sensor hits plus behavior plus context equals action. You won't prove it on TV. You need enough to move escorts, tighten zones, and pay claims without lawyers fighting for months. That means legal frameworks that admit gray and still move money. Get ready for this. The market will punish half measures. If you promise speed and sell fragility, spreads tell on you. If you promise resilience and land both cables in the same ditch, insurers will price your brochure as fiction. You pick a lane, you back it with steel, spacing, vendors, drills, and you show just enough to earn trust. In the end, the trade-off is simple to say and hard to fund. You buy a little more time with a little less speed. You share just enough truth without painting a target. You guard hard without turning every survey ship into a standoff. And you pay people on the water to help you, not hate you. That's not a slogan, that's the seam holding. Personal impact, your money, your flight, your lights. So pull this out of charts and into your day. Start with your money. You open a banking app at lunch and it spins. Not broken, just laggy. Transfers sit pending longer than you like because payment gateways are pacing messages over fatter detours. FX quotes inside the app look a little wider. Your broker pushes a warning, volatility high, some orders may execute at revised prices. It's bland language for we can't hit the button with the same certainty. Trades that used to confirm in seconds take minutes. If you run payroll across borders, your cutoff slides earlier, not because anyone wants it, but because CLS deadlines don't move and backhaul jitter eats the cushion. Your CFO reads a note from the bank, same-day settlement temporarily limited for certain corridors. Translation, float grows, fees creep. You budget around timing. Timing stops cooperating. If you're a small merchant piping card, auths to a gateway in Dublin or London, a few timeouts pop. The retry logic catches most, but declines tick up enough to dent a day's take. Customer service blames network congestion. They're not lying, they just don't mention it's the ocean. Here's where it gets interesting for anyone building in the cloud. A region status page goes yellow, increased error rates, elevated latencies. Your app's EU users report stutter, video buffers, image uploads hang. SREs shift traffic to Frankfurt or Amsterdam, but data gravity pulls you back. Databases anchor you to where the latency hurts. You can fail open, you can't teleport state. Now your flight. Dispatchers draw longer tracks because oceanic control wants bigger spacing when comms feel thin. You don't see the sonar charts. You see a boarding pass with an arrival time 10-20 minutes later than last week for the same route. Once airborne, the captain asks for a more southerly track to dodge weather and antenna issues. Fuel burn rises. Crews creep toward duty limits. Miss the slot on arrival, and you circle. Miss the crew duty window, and you deplane into a terminal that groans. Tickets don't jump today. They edge up next quarter because small costs stack. Extra fuel, crew buffers, schedules slack. If you fly often, you feel it as fewer non-stops, more operational delays, and tighter rebooking inventory when something slips. The safety margin is fine, your schedule margin is. Lights next, not out but pricier and twitchier. When an LNG cargo waits outside Milford Haven and wind drops harder than planned, the grid leans on interconnectors and peakers. Prices bump, then settle, then bump again. If you've got a smart thermostat, it nudges a degree when demand response kicks in. You might not notice, your bill will. Industrial sites feel it first, trimming loads at inconvenient hours. If you run a bakery or a small plant, someone calls to ask if you can shift. You say yes, because the discount helps. You grumble later. Data detours touch everything you don't think about. Your gaming server feels laggy because the matchmaker in Dublin is now a longer hop away. Your video call drops to 480p. Your kid's homework site times out once, then loads. SLAs that promised 5 nines bow to physics. The provider won't admit cable corridor congestion in a ticket. They'll say upstream event. That's the seabed talking through a euphemism. And there's a career angle. If you write code, infra-security and latency engineering stop being niche. If you're a mariner, repair vessels and towage firms need people who can work a line in ugly seas. If you trade, resilience beats speed on the days that set P&L. If you work in policy, seabed compacts and joint drills are jobs, not memos. Here's the crazy part, you pay for this even when nothing breaks. Insurance nudges up, banks pad spreads, airlines bake slack into schedules, cloud bills hide data transfer bumps as traffic reroutes. It's pennies at a time until the week lands and you feel the shape of it. The GIUK Gap is far away on a map. Your wallet, your seat, your screen live on its clock, and on cables carrying 99% of the data your life runs on. The GIUK Gap isn't a mythic map line, it's a live fuse under daily life and money. If it holds, the hum continues. If it snaps, we pay fast. 99% of transatlantic data, roughly $15 trillion in daily exposure, and hunters who have practiced for decades. Want the next layer, how firms quietly harden against this while others bluff? Hit subscribe, then watch the sequel linked here. Share this with whoever runs risk, ops, or policy on your team, because the sea won't wait for our plans, only for what survives.